No one is getting dumber by accident. That's the uncomfortable truth. This isn't a collapse caused by ignorance. It's a design built on convenience. You live in a world where thinking is no longer required, only reacting. Answers arrive before questions fully form. Opinions are pre-packaged. Complexity is compressed into slogans you can swallow without chewing. And slowly, the mind adapts. You stop asking why. You stop following ideas to their end. You stop sitting with confusion long enough for insight to appear. Not because you can't, because you're never given the space to. This generation isn't unintelligent. It's overstimulated, trained to skim instead of read, to respond instead of reflect, to feel informed without ever understanding. And the most dangerous part, it feels normal. You scroll endlessly, consume endlessly, react endlessly. But how often do you think? Slowly, deeply, without interruption. How often do you hold a single idea long enough for it to change you? Carl Jung warned that when the inner world is neglected, the outer world fills the gap. Noise replaces thought. Speed replaces depth. Certainty replaces wisdom. And a mind that never goes inward becomes easy to steer. You may feel the effects already. Shorter attention, irritation with nuance, the craving for instant clarity, even when reality is anything but clear. This isn't stupidity, it's conditioning. So ask yourself something honestly. If a system rewards speed, distraction, and obedience, what kind of minds does it quietly eliminate? When thinking becomes inconvenient. Kant's thinking was necessary, not celebrated, not romanticized. Necessary. You had to remember, you had to reason, you had to sit with problems that didn't resolve immediately. Now, thinking is optional, and anything optional eventually weakens. This is not because people are incapable, it's because the environment no longer demands depth. You are surrounded by systems designed to remove friction. One-click answers, auto-complete thoughts, endless summaries that promise understanding without effort. And your mind, like any system, adapts. It learns that patience is inefficient, that confusion is uncomfortable, that not knowing should be resolved instantly. So it stops tolerating uncertainty. But uncertainty is where thinking begins. Jung understood this deeply. He knew that when the psyche avoids tension, it also avoids growth. Because growth requires holding opposites, contradictions, questions without answers. Modern life doesn't allow this. The moment discomfort appears, it is anesthetized. Scroll, refresh, switch tabs. The discomfort vanishes, and with it, the opportunity to think. You may notice how quickly boredom feels unbearable now, how silence feels intrusive, how waiting feels like an error. These are not personality traits, they are symptoms. Symptoms of a mind trained to expect constant stimulation. And stimulation crowds out reflection. Reflection is slow, quiet, unproductive by modern standards. It doesn't generate metrics. It doesn't perform well. It doesn't scale. So it is quietly discouraged. You are rewarded for speed, for certainty, for having an opinion immediately, not for saying, "I don't know yet." That phrase used to signal humility. Now it signals weakness. So people stop saying it. They form conclusions prematurely, adopt positions they haven't examined, defend ideas they didn't arrive at themselves. This is not stupidity. It is survival in an environment that punishes depth. Jung warned that when the conscious mind is overstimulated, the unconscious compensates, but not with wisdom, with compulsion. People become reactive, emotionally charged, easily provoked. Because unprocessed tension does not disappear, it looks for an outlet. This is why outrage feels addictive, why polarization feels satisfying, why simple narratives feel comforting. They resolve tension quickly. They tell you who is right and who is wrong, who to blame, what to feel. No thinking required, and the relief feels real. But it is temporary, because nothing was integrated. The tension was discharged, not understood. So it returns, louder. This cycle trains the mind away from complexity. Complexity requires patience. Nuance requires effort. Ambiguity requires strength. But none of these are rewarded, so they atrophy. You may feel this at a personal level. The difficulty of reading long-form text, the urge to skim, the irritation when an explanation takes too long. This irritation is not natural. It is trained. Your mind has been conditioned to expect constant payoff. Every sentence must entertain. Every idea must resolve quickly. Every moment must justify itself. But thought doesn't work that way. Real thinking is inefficient. It wanders. It circles. It contradicts itself. It wastes time. And time is the one thing modern systems cannot tolerate being wasted. So thinking becomes inconvenient. And what becomes inconvenient becomes rare. Jung believed that when thinking declines, people don't become empty, they become filled. Filled with borrowed opinions, with collective emotions, with ready-made identities. The inner voice grows quiet, not because it has nothing to say, because it is never given space to speak. You may notice how often people repeat phrases that sound thoughtful but feel hollow. How language becomes formulaic. How conversations feel interchangeable. This is what happens when thinking is replaced by signaling. You don't speak to explore, you speak to align. Alignment feels safe. It tells you where you belong, what you're allowed to think, what reactions are acceptable. And safety is seductive, especially in a world that moves too fast to make sense of. But Jung warned that safety purchased at the cost of inner development leads to infantilization, not intellectual incompetence, psychological dependency. People wait to be told what matters, what is dangerous, what is true. They outsource judgment. And once judgment is outsourced, thinking is no longer required. This is how a generation can be highly educated and deeply unwise at the same time. Information increases, understanding decreases. Knowledge becomes something you possess, not something that transforms you. You know facts, but you don't know yourself. And self-knowledge is the foundation of all thinking. Without it, intelligence becomes mechanical, efficient, precise, and empty. Jung believed the danger was not stupidity, but unconsciousness. A society that does not think deeply does not know why it believes what it believes. And what is not known can be manipulated, easily, quietly. This is why the decline of thinking is never announced as a crisis. It is framed as progress, faster access, simpler explanations, less friction. But friction is where depth lives. Remove it, and you remove the conditions required for a mature mind. So the question is not whether people are becoming less intelligent. The question is whether intelligence is still needed. And if it isn't, what kind of humans does that future require? The death of attention and the rise of obedience. Attention is not just a skill, it is a form of power. Whatever holds your attention shapes your inner world, and whoever controls attention controls thought. This is the part no one wants to say out loud. A mind that cannot focus cannot resist. Jung understood that attention is the gateway to consciousness. Without sustained attention, nothing reaches depth. Ideas remain shallow. Emotions stay unprocessed. Contradictions are never integrated. So the psyche stays fragmented. Modern systems thrive on this fragmentation. Your attention is pulled in dozens of directions at once. Notifications, feeds, alerts, endless novelty. Each pull is small but cumulative. Your mind is never allowed to settle, and a mind that never settles cannot see clearly. It reacts. Reaction replaces reflection. You respond emotionally before you understand. You adopt positions before you examine them. You feel certain before you know why. This is not accidental. A distracted population is easier to guide than a reflective one. Jung warned that when individuals lose the ability to think independently, they merge psychologically with the group. The crowd thinks for them. Opinions become contagious. Emotions spread rapidly. Nuance disappears. This is where obedience begins. Not forced obedience, voluntary obedience. You align because it feels safe, because everyone else is doing it, because standing alone requires attention, and attention is exhausted. You may notice how quickly dissent is framed as danger, how questioning is treated as hostility, how complexity is mistaken for threat. This happens because fragmented minds crave simplicity. Simple narratives reduce cognitive load. Clear enemies focus emotion. Binary thinking removes ambiguity. And ambiguity is exhausting when attention is weak. So people choose certainty over truth, not consciously, neurologically. Jung believed that when consciousness is weak, the unconscious takes over, but not in a wise way, in a primitive way. Instinct, emotion, group loyalty. You see this everywhere. Outrage cycles that burn hot and disappear. Trends that dominate thought and vanish overnight. Collective certainty that collapses without reflection. Nothing integrates, because integration requires attention over time, and time is never given. You may feel this personally. The difficulty of staying with a single book, the restlessness when nothing is happening, the urge to check, scroll, refresh, even when you don't want to. This is not lack of discipline, it is conditioning. Your attention has been trained to fragment, and fragmented attention cannot support independent thought. So obedience doesn't arrive wearing chains, it arrives as convenience. Why think when an answer is already trending? Why question when consensus is visible? Why explore when conclusions are handed to you? Jung believed this creates a new kind of conformity, not enforced by authority, but by exhaustion. People comply because resistance takes energy, and energy is already drained. This is how critical thinking disappears, not through censorship, through fatigue. You stop questioning, not because you agree, but because you are tired. Tired of complexity, tired of conflict, tired of thinking alone. So you let the collective decide. And once the collective decides, thinking feels unnecessary, even irresponsible. You may notice how quickly people defend positions they encountered only hours ago, how emotionally attached they become to ideas they've never lived with. This attachment fills the vacuum left by lost attention. It gives identity, belonging, direction. And direction feels relieving when your inner compass is dulled. Jung warned that societies like this become psychologically regressive, not childlike, tribal, driven by instinct and emotion rather than reflection. And tribal minds do not tolerate difference well. They demand alignment, because alignment reduces tension. Thinking deeply increases it. So deep thinkers become inconvenient, not dangerous, inconvenient. They slow things down, complicate narratives, refuse easy conclusions. And in a system optimized for speed, slowness looks like sabotage. So it is discouraged, mocked, dismissed, ignored. This is how obedience becomes the default, not because people are weak, because attention has been dismantled. And without attention, freedom is theoretical. You cannot choose if you cannot stay present long enough to see what you're choosing. Jung believed that reclaiming attention was the first step toward individuation, not self-improvement, self-possession. The ability to stay with a thought long enough for it to reveal its deeper layers. The ability to tolerate boredom without anesthetizing it. The ability to sit with discomfort without escaping into reaction. These abilities are now rare, not because they are impossible, because they are unrewarded. But without them, a generation can be endlessly informed and quietly obedient at the same time. The mind remains busy, but never awake. When intelligence becomes a liability, there is a point where intelligence stops being useful, not because it disappears, but because it becomes inconvenient. In a system built on speed, depth slows things down. In a culture addicted to certainty, questions feel disruptive. Jung understood this tension clearly. He knew that intelligence does not threaten power by being loud. It threatens power by being slow. A thinking mind pauses. It hesitates. It refuses to react on command. And this refusal creates friction. So intelligence is subtly discouraged, not attacked directly, just made socially costly. You notice it when people grow impatient as soon as a thought takes too long to explain. When nuance is dismissed as overthinking. When reflection is mocked as weakness. Why complicate it? It's not that deep. Just pick a side. These phrases are not arguments. They are defense mechanisms. They protect the system from interruption. Because a mind that interrupts momentum forces reconsideration, and reconsideration is expensive. Jung believed this is how intelligence becomes isolated, not because it is rare, because it refuses to synchronize. The intelligent person does not move at the speed of trends. They do not absorb opinions instantly. They do not react before understanding. So they appear out of step, detached, slow, sometimes even suspicious. But what is really happening is that intelligence no longer fits the tempo. You may feel this yourself. The discomfort of speaking carefully in a world that rewards immediacy. The fatigue of explaining why you need time to think before deciding. The quiet pressure to simplify your thoughts so they don't inconvenience others. Eventually, many people comply. They learn to hide depth, to translate complexity into sound bites, to suppress questions that don't land quickly. Not because they stopped thinking, because thinking became socially inefficient. Jung would say, this is how intelligence retreats underground. It doesn't vanish, it goes private. People stop thinking out loud, stop questioning publicly, stop risking misunderstanding. They think alone. And while solitude can deepen insight, it also removes friction. Ideas are no longer tested through dialogue. They are either internalized or abandoned. This creates a paradox. Intelligent people withdraw. The public sphere becomes flatter, and the absence of depth is mistaken for its extinction. So society concludes that people are becoming stupid, but Jung would disagree. He would say intelligence is being selectively silenced, not through force, through environment. When depth is punished with isolation and simplicity rewarded with belonging, most people choose belonging, not because they are weak, because they are human. This is how collective intelligence erodes, not because individuals lose capacity, because the cost of using it becomes too high. You may notice how often thoughtful people retreat from public discourse, how rarely nuance survives online, how quickly careful thinkers are drowned out by confident noise. Noise travels faster than insight, because noise requires no integration. It demands reaction. Insight demands time, and time is the one resource no one is given. Jung warned that when intelligence is driven underground, the unconscious fills the space left behind with myth, with emotion, with projection. People don't stop needing meaning, they just stop generating it consciously. So meaning arrives from outside, ready-made narratives, heroes and villains, simple explanations for complex pain. These narratives are not stupid, they are efficient. They give direction quickly, and direction feels better than confusion. But direction without understanding leads to repetition, the same cycles, the same conflicts, the same mistakes, over and over. This is how a society can advance technologically while regressing psychologically. The tools become sophisticated. The minds using them become reactive. And reactivity feels like engagement, but it is not thinking. Thinking requires distance, space between stimulus and response. That space is disappearing. You may feel its absence as impatience, as irritability, as the urge to conclude quickly. These are not personal failures, they are signals. Signals that the environment no longer supports the rhythm intelligence needs to function. Jung believed that individuation, the process of becoming whole, requires resistance to the collective tempo, the willingness to slow down when everything speeds up, to think deeply when everything demands reaction. This resistance is not dramatic, it is quiet. You take time before forming opinions. You read slowly. You sit with discomfort instead of resolving it immediately. These acts seem insignificant, but they are radical, because they reintroduce depth into a system that thrives on surface. And depth always changes things, not quickly, but permanently. choosing depth in a world that rewards speed. Glenn, we are not creating a stupid generation. We are creating a hurried one. A generation trained to move too fast to think clearly. The problem is not lack of intelligence, it is lack of space. Space to doubt, space to question, space to let ideas mature. Carl Jung believed that when the inner world is ignored, it does not disappear. It becomes chaotic, and chaos looks like stupidity from the outside. But it is not emptiness. It is overload without integration. You are not immune to this. You feel it in your attention, in your impatience, in your craving for immediate clarity. The question is not whether you are affected. The question is whether you will adapt passively or resist deliberately. Resistance does not look like rebellion. It looks like slowness, like refusing to rush to judgment, refusing to outsource your thinking, refusing to fill every moment with noise. Depth is not efficient, but it is stabilizing. It gives you an inner reference point that does not shift with trends or outrage cycles. Without that reference point, you are always reacting, and reaction is exhausting. The system does not need you to be stupid. It only needs you to be busy. Busy consuming, busy responding, busy aligning. Because a busy mind has no time to reflect on whether it agrees. Choosing depth means accepting discomfort, boredom, uncertainty, being out of sync. But it also returns something rare: orientation. You begin to know where you stand, not because you've chosen a side, but because you've taken the time to understand. That understanding cannot be rushed. It cannot be summarized fully. It cannot be transmitted instantly. It must be lived. And living it means going against the current, quietly, consistently. So let this question remain with you, without forcing an answer. If intelligence now feels inconvenient to the world, what would it mean for you to protect it anyway?